Hello, fellow readers and booktubers. It was about a month ago that I posted a tag that I titled Reading Books About Reading Books. And I invited everyone to share their favorite books about books. Books that dealt with the joy of reading, books in which the author would reflect upon his or her own experience with books, books about where people would describe their own personal libraries, books about the benefits of reading books, and on and on. And the response to this was really wonderful. And a lot of, in the comments section, a lot of you offered up the titles of various books that dealt with the joys of reading, and it really added to my TBR list quite a bit. I'd like to revisit that tag right now and discuss a book called The Whole 5 Feet by Christopher Beha. All right. Now, before I get into the rather curious title of this book, let me just explain who Christopher Beha is. He's an American writer. He was editor of Harper's Magazine from 2019 to 2023. He's written essays and reviews that have showed up in the New York Review of Books, the London Review, and a bunch of other publications. He's a very well-known and very well-respected writer. Also, he is the author of three novels that all received rave reviews. The earliest of those appeared in 2012. It was called What Happened to Sophie Wilder. Then in 2014, the novel was called Arts and Entertainments. And then in 2020, he was longlisted for the National Book Award in Fiction with The Index of Self-Destructive Acts. This was my first encounter with Beha. It's a really good novel, not quite as grim as it might seem, although it's not the most uplifting thing I ever read. It's beautifully written. It's about a family in crisis. Right? But, and so I read this, and at first I thought this was his first novel. Then I found out he'd written the other two, which I have yet to read. And then I discovered he'd written a memoir way back in 2009, and that's The Whole 5 Feet. Now, the thing to appreciate about Beha is, so I've read one of his novels, I read this memoir, and I've read critiques and reviews and even some interviews with him. And this is the kind of writer that he deals with the big issues, the big existential questions, the meaning of identity, the meaning of life, about faith and hope. Without being ostentatious about it, he focuses a great deal on the spiritual dimension of human existence. When I did a little research before I organized this presentation, and I was surprised to discover that Beha was raised a Roman Catholic. And at some point, probably in his late teens or early 20s, he turned his back on the faith. And now I believe he's in his mid-40s and he's returned to the church. And that's not what this book is about. What fascinated me about that was it kind of mirrors my own life. But that's another story for another post. To get back to the subject at hand, The Whole 5 Feet, this is a memoir that deals with a brief period of time in Beha's life when he was in his mid-20s. He had lost his job. He was deep in debt. He was lost. He was very ill. In fact, he was quite sick, and he'd gone to a number of doctors, and they never seemed to agree on exactly what it was that ailed him, although the illness was for real, and eventually does get diagnosed. And he's in such desperate straits, he's sinking into a depression. He moves back home. Now, and then while he's at home, a beloved family member dies. I should mention that, Beha does seem to come from what we might think of as a privileged background. Home for him was in New York City. He'd gone to private schools. He went to Princeton. However, we shouldn't think that just because someone enjoys material comforts that they're happy or at peace. And Beha certainly wasn't. About his mid-20s, I think about 25 or so, is when he moves back home. And while he's there, in the midst of these struggles, these personal struggles and this depression, he decides upon a kind of a mission or a project he's going to undertake. His family, in the family library, they've got the complete set of the Harvard Classics. This is that 51-volume set that was published in 1909. Some homes still have this. I occasionally will see it in libraries. Once in a while, I'll see volumes of it in used bookstores. I've never seen the complete set before. But Beha's family had the entire set. And so he set upon himself this mission to read all 51 volumes. the title of this book, The Whole 5 Feet, refers to the fact that if you took all 51 volumes and placed them back to back on a bookshelf, it would take up 5 feet. In fact, when the book was first conceived, or when the collection was first conceived, it was thought of as the 5-foot project. Let me see if I can find that here. Don't want to misinform you. Oh, the 5-foot shelf is what it was called. At any rate, these Harvard classics, this was published in the early 20th century. It was organized and edited by the president of Harvard at the time, Charles Eliot. And his intention was to gather together some of the greatest writings of the past 2.5 millennia, and writings in philosophy and in poetry and in literature and in history and in science, and put them all in these volumes and present them in such a way that the theory was, if you were to read all 51 volumes, by the time you were done with this, you would have received an education equal to what you might have received had you gone to a more formal university or college. In other words, the Harvard Classics were there for those people who could not afford higher education, people who just didn't really have time for that kind of thing. And in the end, as Eliot would put it, you would become a truly cultivated man. That was the expression he used. And so Beha decides he's going to read all 51 volumes. And he begins at the first of the year. And he notices that all the big names are there, and even some names he didn't recognize. We've got, from Socrates to Darwin, Aristophanes to Milton, Homer, Henry James, St. Augustine, David Hume, Pascal, Voltaire, Charles Dickens, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky. The list goes on and on and on. But Beha noticed that these writers and these works were not placed in chronological order. They were organized by theme, and sometimes he found a theme kind of hard to discern. So it wouldn't be like you would find Socrates and Aristophanes and some of the other Greek writers all in one volume. No, you might find Socrates, and in that same volume you might find John Milton, and in the same volume you might find Charles Darwin. At any rate, Beha, he threw himself into this thing, and he's reading volume after volume. He also starts to notice there are some omissions, not very many female writers, although Jane Austen is in there, and I believe, George Sand is in there, which was actually the pen name of Amantine Dupin. She had to use a masculine pen name. But those are, I think, the only two female authors in there. Really no people of color. Mostly, almost exclusively, writers of a essentially European or Western civilization background. Although he does include some works of Confucius, there's some Buddhist writings in there, and even some chapters from the Quran. But this is largely, the white European elite, the intellectual elite. I hesitate to use the word European because the Greek philosophers are in there as well, although I guess you could regard them. They are European, but not Western European. But nonetheless, these are the great works of Western civilization, more or less. And, and of course the question then comes up, well, there are no women, no people of color, no people of other cultures. That can be troubling. It can be explained as the idea that this collection is a product of its own time. This is the late 19th century, early 20th century. That's kind of a queasy excuse. It's a valid excuse. But at the same time, there's no reason to dismiss all of this collection, this huge collection, just because it doesn't fill the requirements that are needed or recognized today to be a real expression of the human intellect over 2.5 millennia. Because many of the great works are in here. Oh, and by the way, it should be mentioned that it's not just women and people of color and non-Christians that are ignored in this thing. Aristotle's not in here. Also, Thomas Aquinas is not in here, and a couple of other big names. And Beha was curious about this, and he couldn't really find a good explanation for why certain big names were left out. They were conspicuous by their absence. But nonetheless, he did read. He's reading through this thing, and this is a memoir, and he's intermingling his reading of the Harvard classics with his latest doctor's appointment, his latest illness. This family member who was already very ill takes a turn for the worse, and so all these these struggles of his own personal life, which are just piling up. And he continues to read. He puts aside hours every day to get through these 51 volumes. Now, whether he succeeds in that, I don't want to give away anything. No spoilers here. But I will say that he did notice as he read these, some of the works he admitted that he skimmed through a little bit. Specifically, he notes Charles Darwin's, I think it was The Origin of the Species. He found to read more like a science textbook, not the most compelling reading. So he did skim through some things, but what he noticed as you're reading the great works, the Harvard great works, it becomes more than just an acquisition of knowledge. It's more than just an accumulation of facts. These works are not just there for entertainment. There's something much deeper going on, and this deeper thing has to do with the shaping of your intellect, your worldview, the sharpening of your critical thinking skills. And so at one point in the book, Beha makes an observation here. He's referring to the editor of this, Charles Eliot, the president of Harvard at the time, who conceived of this idea. And Beha would write, "What exactly was this 20th century idea of a cultivated man to which Eliot refers?" In his introduction, Eliot had said, if you read all 51 volumes, you'll be a cultivated man. And again, note the man. The patriarchy was strong at that time. You could easily say the cultivated woman, cultivated person. So Beha is asking, what does Eliot mean by this? Eliot makes an effort to answer the question himself. Quote, "The best acquisition of a cultivated man is a liberal frame of mind or way of thinking. But there must be added to that possession acquaintance with the prodigious store of recorded discoveries, experiences, and reflections which humanity in its intermittent and irregular progress from barbarism to civilization has acquired and laid up." Close quote. Over the course of reading The Shelf, I had come to a much greater understanding of Eliot's idea of culture as internal improvement rather than as a set of characteristics or a collection of knowledge. From Plato to Emerson, the best authors in the classics embody a particular approach to learning rather than merely conveying a set of facts. Paradoxically, one of the great lessons of Eliot's prodigious store of recorded discoveries, experiences, and reflections is that one must always struggle to see things with fresh eyes. As Emerson would say, we should be sure to read the works of Cicero, Locke, and Bacon, but we should also remember that Cicero, Locke, and Bacon were young men in libraries when they wrote these books. And yet this caution must be balanced with an appreciation for how much the best of the past has to offer us. It is true that the goal is intellectual self-sufficiency. It is also true that we need the wisdom of those who came before, if only to teach us how eventually to do without it. We need those young men in their libraries to remind us that we might achieve just as much as they did. That's a wonderful testimony to reading the classics. It's a wonderful expression of the joys of reading and the pleasures and the insights that reading can bring to you. So this is the book, The Whole 5 Feet by Charles Beha. I know I've mispronounced his name a couple of times in this, and again, if by chance he should see this, I apologize for that. But I do salute you for this wonderful memoir, and I recommend it to all of you. That's all I've got for you today. Peace